Bristol Channel is a vast wedge-shaped body of water which increasingly separates the south coast of Wales from the southwest of England as it gets closer to the Atlantic. Just here on the northern edge of Bridgewater Bay, it's barely about a dozen or so miles across. And on a clear day, just like today, you get a really good view of Wales and its hills beyond. Now, it's at this point that the Severn Estuary gives up completely and becomes the Bristol Channel. And just out there on the horizon, you can see the stark outline of Steepholm, while here behind me you have the massive bulk of Green Down, which is the last outcrop of the Mendip Hills here on the mainland. And it's here that our summer journey is going to begin. A journey that's going to take us westwards along the shoreline of Somerset and North Devon and into the landscape that lies behind that coast. Now, I know that I'm biased, but I do think that you're going to find that what we have here is some of the most beautiful and fascinating countryside that you'll find anywhere in Britain.
This part of the world earns much of its living today from the holidaymaker, and the numerous caravan sites along this particular stretch of the coastline certainly bear witness to that. But I'm on my way to a holiday resort that was already a firm favourite with the public by the middle of the last century. And curiously, it was a local clergyman who started the process that put Burnham-on-Sea onto the tourist map. Burnham was just a tiny fishing village when the Reverend David Davies built a lighthouse next to the church in 1800. When Trinity House bought him out for £13,500 29 years later, he decided to build this elegant bathhouse and pump room and turn Burnham into a spa. Its fame as a watering place soon spread, and in Victorian times it became a fully fledged seaside resort. Meanwhile, just along the beach, Trinity House had erected this rather eccentric-looking lighthouse. Built in 1832, it became redundant a few years ago, but it was originally designed to work in conjunction with another higher lighthouse a little further inland, which is still actually in use. The idea was that approaching ships had to get the red stripe on the high lighthouse directly over the red stripe on the low lighthouse, and when they'd achieved that, they could follow the deep water channel into the mouth of the River Parrett, which would then take them on up to Bridgewater. When this 900-foot-long slipway was opened in 1858, paddle steamers started a regular service to Burnham, bringing trippers over from South Wales. Others made their way here on the railway, which had arrived at the same time. And it goes without saying that people still like to come here, especially on a hot sunny day.
Burnham recently acquired this brand new seafront, and very nice it is too, certainly very much in keeping with its Victorian image. But it's what lies on the other side of that wall that's of vital importance to Burnham's future well-being. It's a brand new sea wall, the biggest undertaking ever carried out by the Wessex Water Authority. In fact, it's the largest project of its kind anywhere in the country. It runs for, just a little bit over a mile, and it cost £7.5 million. Now, that's a lot of money, but it's a cost that was shared between the authority, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the local county and district councils, all of them bodies with an interest in ensuring that Burnham and the surrounding countryside got the best protection possible from the sea. It really is quite an amazing structure, and it was especially designed to withstand any predictable combination of wind, of tide, and of storm. And what it marks is the culmination of a battle against the elements all along this stretch of coast that's been going on for centuries.
The Great Storm of December 1981 was the last occasion when serious flooding came to Burnham, though much greater devastation has been recorded in the past. And at times the sea has even invaded most of the flat, low-lying area that stretches out behind the town. But it's usually just heavy rain that brings on the flooding here, because these are wetlands. They're known as the Somerset Levels. Apart from the very flatness of the land, much of which is below sea level, it's the network of drainage ditches, reams they're called, that gives the levels their unique character. The willow is the typical tree here. It thrives in wet ground and it usually grows next to a ream. For hundreds of years, the willow has provided the raw material for a local industry. And this crop of specially planted withies is waiting to be harvested and painstakingly woven into baskets, hampers, lobster pots and garden furniture. Another traditional levels industry is peat cutting, though these days machines have taken over what was once a back-breaking occupation. And whereas in the past peat was only sold locally and burnt as fuel, it's now almost exclusively used as garden compost, and it's shipped all over the country. Its extraction has also revealed some quite extraordinary relics from prehistoric times. They're wooden trackways that have been wonderfully preserved by the acidity of the peat. They were constructed by ancient man to help him move around what was in his day an extremely wet swampland. This is a dig that took place in 1971 when archaeologists investigated the most famous of them all, the Sweet Track, named after Ray Sweet, the peat cutter who discovered it. Close examination showed that it was built 6,000 years ago, and that made it the oldest roadway in the world. The levels have featured in military history too. Near Western Zoyland you can find a memorial to the Battle of Sedgemoor, which brought Monmouth's rebellion to an end in 1685. It was a century or so later that the vast system of ditches and larger drains was created to get water out of the levels and into the Bristol Channel. 22 pumping stations regulate the process today. But water levels have now become a major issue. Basically, farmers like them low and wildlife conservationists prefer them to be kept high. The pumps are run by the Wessex Water Authority, which has been caught up in the middle of it all. And as Basil Tinkler of the authority points out, the whole situation has changed dramatically over the last few years.
In the early 70s, we were still sort of dig for victory, and the government policy was food from our own resources. The farmers were being encouraged to intensify, to borrow money. In fact, they were being given money to intensify. And now, in the 80s, of course, there are food surpluses, and therefore the government grants have all gone. Conservation has come more to the fore. People have realised the wildlife that has been lost, and so now we are in the position where we are trying to get a good blend between the conservation and the farming. Unfortunately, the same conditions don't allow the conservation and the farming to thrive. For the last 10 years, I suppose, drainage has stopped, improved drainage has stopped, and we've come to a position where we're trying to keep the status quo as asked for by the Nature Conservancy.
But surely you must be aware that the RSPB and other conservation groups are not at all happy that you're keeping the levels high enough.
Well, I don't think that's quite true. We liaise very, very closely with these various people, and in fact many of them are my friends. And a great deal has been done, but you've got to remember that the farmer's trying to make a living here. Now, as I said, a few years ago, we agreed not to lower water levels anymore. Now what is being asked that we put the clock back and that we actually raise water levels, and discussions are going on with the farmers and the conservationists, and hopefully we will get an agreement between both parties. We've got customers on both sides.
From the conservationists' point of view, the Somerset Levels and moors are the most important wetlands in Britain. They constitute 200 square miles of scarce wildlife habitats. They support 60 or 70 different kinds of grass. There are plants that only grow in these damp conditions, and dragonflies come in abundance. But above all, they attract thousands and thousands of birds for whom wetlands are a vital feeding and breeding ground. In an attempt to protect this rich natural heritage, 83,000 acres of land have now been designated as either sites of special scientific interest or environmentally sensitive areas. These involve cash compensation to farmers for managing their land in a way that won't be harmful to wildlife. But this hasn't been popular with a number of the farmers. Indeed, in 1983, some of them publicly burnt the letters notifying them that their land had become part of an SSSI. They even hanged and burnt effigies of the conservationists involved. They lost that particular argument. After all, SSSIs are backed up by law. But Stan Davies of the RSPB, who was represented by this effigy, is far from happy with the way things have gone since then.
Individual farmers have come to agreements and have taken some money and have been very helpful. But across the broad pattern of the Somerset levels, you need to get the water table right. The key to all these wetlands is that they've got to be wetlands, and that means they've got to be flooded in winter, and in the spring they've still got to be pretty soggy. And the wetland flowers and the birds that probe in the soil need that moisture. And of course, although the individual farmers have come to agreements, the Water Authority haven't been able to produce the right conditions which need to be produced at the pumping station. Each more water level needs to be produced at the pumping station.
I think you're being very diplomatic. Are you really saying that actually the Water Board have let you down, and where the farmers are concerned, some of them actually want their cake and eat it? They want to take the money that's being offered, and they also want to farm the land. Yes,
I suppose it's a fairly human reaction, though, and to be fair to the Water Authority, they have over the years been part of an organisation that was designed to drain these areas. I mean, that's what one of their functions is. They are a land drainage authority. Now that attitudes are changing, we don't want more intensive production, we do want wildlife to be looked after. There's a need for a change of attitude, and that hasn't been easy.
Well, your latest report does talk about bird numbers being depleted. Which species particularly have been affected?
Well, the most of all is the snipe. I mean, the snipe is a typical bird of these wet meadows. It's used to be in its hundreds. It really was a common species. And in the last 10 years, we've lost 70%. And even 10 years ago, the population was already possibly lower than it should have been. So we're really talking about a massive decline. If that continued for another 5 years, we perhaps wouldn't see any snipe out here, although we can hear them zooming around us today.
So what of the future? Is it bleak, or is it going to get better?
I think we're probably at the bottom at the moment. I think the only way to go is up. And I wouldn't say I'm highly optimistic, but I'm quietly optimistic.
Farming here is different from farming anywhere else. These lowlands mainly provide summer grazing for beef and dairy cattle. Then, come the winter and the wetter ground, the stock has to be taken up to the surrounding hills, where most of the farms themselves are located. It's this traditional pattern of farming that the conservation bodies want to see maintained. And they have other specific requirements too, concerning, for example, the use of pesticides, herbicides and fertilizers, and even the precise time when grass can be cut. Alan Banwell, a farmer and local district councillor, admits that there are those who still object to outsiders interfering in the way they farm.
Oh yes, I think there are some. The progressive farmers, I think, do resent it to a certain extent. I think they feel it's an encroachment, it's their land, and I think they wonder why anybody else should be able to tell them how they should manage it. But I think they've softened the blow by offering management agreements and compensation for not doing the things that you would wish to do.
Do you think, on the whole, then, that most of the people who live here and the farmers who farm the land actually appreciate the value of what they have here?
But in the way of wildlife? Oh yes, I'm sure they do, every one of them. The farmers are much more wildlife conscious than people are led to believe.
Do you think that enough is actually being done to encourage farmers to keep the land the way that it is, or would you like to see perhaps a little more money being put in the way of subsidy?
Yes, I'm not quite sure how far they go with it. I'm not quite sure what they can do further without flooding some of the areas of land, which there is a proposal this time that they should be flooding some areas early in the spring to get it damper for the wading birds to nest in the spring. I'm not too sure in my own mind whether this really would do the thing. I think there are lots of other factors like vermin and things like that could be causing. But I somehow feel that possibly with a little time, maybe the birds will come back again.
Somerset's largest river, the Parrett, passes close by Burrow Mump, one of those rare features around here, a hill. It could well have been part of King Alfred's military defences when he retreated to this mostly water-covered land. And it's near here that he supposedly burnt the cakes while planning his strategy to defeat the Danes. From here, the Parrett flows to Bridgwater, and until the M5 motorway came along, this was the only place between Burrow Mump and the Bristol Channel that traffic could cross the river by bridge. The terrible traffic jams, especially in the summer, were a nightmare for people who lived here, as well as those stuck in their cars.
It was at this bridging point that the town of Bridgwater grew up, and you could be excused for thinking that that was a very appropriate name for a place that had a bridge over some water. But it turns out that the second half of the name actually has nothing at all to do with the river. Instead, it comes from one of William the Conqueror's Norman supporters, one Walter of Douay, who was given this and other land in the area by a grateful king. So really, it shouldn't be Bridgwater, but the Bridge of Walter. Well, the bridge that stands here now has been around for a little over 100 years, and this one replaced a really lovely iron bridge that was constructed in the closing years of the 18th century. That one was constructed by the pioneering ironmasters of the Iron Bridge Gorge in Shropshire, who'd built the first one in the world there just a few years before. And before that, in medieval times, there was a handsome three-arched stone bridge which stopped seagoing vessels from going any further upstream and concentrated trade at this point.
By the 15th century, Bridgwater had become a prosperous port, trading with Ireland, France and Spain. And a good deal of the cargo that arrived here was transferred onto barges and taken further inland, up the river to Langport. But strangely, almost nothing has survived from that early period in Bridgwater's history. The great Norman castle, featured in the town's crest, was demolished by Cromwell. Just a remnant, the Watergate, can be found hidden away in a back alley. It's such a pity that more can't be made of this overlooked bit of architecture. The only medieval building left intact is Bridgwater's handsome parish church, St Mary's. And it was from its tower in 1685 that the Duke of Monmouth saw the King's army out on the levels, a historic moment that resulted, of course, in the Battle of Sedgemoor. Today, the most prominent feature on the skyline is the cellophane factory, which has made such a contribution to the town's economy. The last surviving beehive kiln is a reminder of an older local industry, brick and tile making, which was given an early boost by the construction of Castle Street in 1721. This very pleasing example of Georgian design illustrates the splendid principle of variety within uniformity. When you look a little closer, you realise that all the doorways are different. And it was at number 11 Castle Street that the very first arts centre in the country was opened in 1946. It's really quite surprising what you can find here in the way of architectural oddities if you just look around. These are great fun, but the eye can't fail to be assaulted by this decorative scheme. Its purpose was to demonstrate the potential of precast concrete as a building material, but the cause was doomed to failure. Here, brick reigned supreme, and the 19th century house remains a folly. The history of brickmaking in the town is a subject of particular interest to Bill Chidgey, a former mayor.
It was the major industry, the source of employment. 20-odd brick fields, some quite small, some quite large. It was just about the major industry.
The lovely thing I think about Bridgwater is that as you look around, you can actually see that legacy here in the town still, can't you?
Oh, it's a brick town, yes, definitely.
And did they just have them for home consumption, or did they send them to the rest of Britain and to export even?
Oh, yes, very much so. There was a popular export of tiles especially all over the world. In fact, the Mediterranean especially, and the continent, used to export tiles and bring back wine. They were generally exported as tiles, mainly as tiles, because bricks were that much heavier. They weren't very big ships, you see. 100, 150 tons was about the size of the average.
Now, what's this Bath brick that I've been hearing about?
I got a couple of those. I'll show you, actually. This one is packaged for sale, and you have the instructions for use on the side.
Best Bath brick, guaranteed genuine Bridgewater. And what did you do with it?
Well, it says on the back, if I read it, scrape or rub the brick to powder. Damp the powder with water, petroleum or turpentine, and apply with rag, finishing with a polishing leather or cloth. You clean knives and things with it. And the actual brick was this color, a sandy sort of soft brick. And it was actually taken from the mud within a mile of Bridgewater, above the town for a mile, and below the town for a mile, the mud was suitable to make this. Below that, it was too sandy, and above that, it was too muddy. But just here, this was ideally suited to make Bath brick. Presumably, Mr. Bath was the chap who discovered that.
Well, I must say, quite nice to see something to be made out of the mud, because you have got an awful lot of it around
Yes,
Bridgewater.
It doesn't look very attractive, but it did bring in a lot of trade in its day.
Right in the centre of Bridgewater, the town's most famous son dominates the scene. He was Admiral Robert Blake, who commanded the Navy under Cromwell. His exploits were legion. He defeated royalists, routed the Dutch and Spanish fleets, and cleared the high seas of pirates. His memory is kept alive not only by this statue, but by the town's museum, which has been set up in his birthplace. Appropriately, the flag of Cromwell's Commonwealth flies overhead. Several graffiti depicting ships form part of a display recalling Blake's career. And they're featured because they're thought to have been done by Blake himself when he was a boy. But just how confident is the curator, Nick Nicholson, that they really are his handiwork?
One can't be absolutely certain, obviously, but this is where he was born, and there's records of it being his room, and that he was keen on boats and interested. And I think it's therefore fair to say that he was the one who did it.
Well, you have here in the museum, Nick, many mementos from his life, both in the army and at sea. And this, in fact, was his compass, wasn't it?
Yes, that was given to us by one of the members of the Blake family who lived in America. And the extract from one of his letters telling us all about it. And that is how we know that it's a genuine article.
It's a bit rough, isn't it? Where did he have this made, do you think?
I think, as far as I can see, it was made in the dockyard at Plymouth.
But obviously it served its purpose, didn't it? And you've got the most marvellous travelling chest. Now, tell me about that.
It was his sort of mobile office that he used to carry around with him and set up in his captain's cabin, doing all his office work.
In fact, we're calling him Admiral Blake, but that isn't his proper title, is it?
General at Sea. General at Sea is his correct title, and the Americans of relations get very cross when, in fact, you call him Admiral. He is General at Sea.
Well, General at Sea or Admiral, how do you think he rates historically against the other great admirals, like Nelson, for instance?
It is generally said that he's second to Nelson, but in fact, Nelson himself said that Blake was a better admiral than he was.
By the 19th century, Bridgewater's maritime trade had expanded enormously. So, to improve the facilities and the profits, a floating harbour was opened in 1841. The massive problem caused by mud coming in from the river was solved by Bertha, a dredger that pulled herself along on chains. And her job was to scrape the mud away from the sides so that it could be easily flushed away. Bertha performed this task throughout the commercial life of the dock, and happily she still survives in retirement as an exhibit in the Exeter Maritime Museum. Due to a relentless decline in trade, the dock was closed in 1971, and during the decade that followed, it presented a miserable scene of dilapidation and dereliction. Somerset County Council, however, were determined to breathe life back into it, and they masterminded a scheme to transform it into an attractive and useful asset to the town. For the last 5 years, work has been carried out to create up to 350 new houses and apartments, alongside a marina where boating enthusiasts will be able to moor between trips up the canal to Taunton, up the river to Langport, or down the river to Burnham and the Bristol Channel. I think it's been a most successful undertaking. Well, as it's high tide and navigation on the River Parrett is entirely dependent on the state of the tide, I've accepted the offer of a trip downstream to the mouth of the river. And even in a boat going this fast, it'll take something like 20 minutes, as we're now 7 or 8 miles inland. A couple of miles outside Bridgewater, the wharf at Dunball is still doing good business. Built as an adjunct to the main dock at Bridgewater, it's now used as a delivery point for sand dredged out of the Bristol Channel, and cargoes such as animal feeds, which come in from all over the world. Two or 3 miles further on again, we find the little harbour at Cummage. Today it's a haven for small pleasure craft, but it was once the home of the hobblers who towed the sailing ships up and down the river. It was also a very busy little port, exporting, amongst other things, its own high-quality bricks. These days, though, the villagers are quite happy for the big ships to pass them by. And next time, I'll be finding out what it's like on the coast when the tide goes out.